Welcome, listeners, to a journey into the heart of Africa, where ancient myths and modern marvels intertwine. Prepare to be captivated by tales of wisdom, courage, and the enduring spirit of the human heart. From the book Agony in Her Voice. Chapter 1. Pause there, Morocco, and weigh thy value with an even hand, if thou best rated by thy estimation. Thou dost deserve enough, and yet. This morning I was enjoying myself tremendously. My only worry at that moment was that soon the passage would come to an end, and I would come to Aragon's boring rantings. However, I decided to continue. And yet enough may not extend so far as to the lady, and yet to be afeard of my deserving were but a weak disabling of myself. Anyone seeing me would never have believed I was teaching. I looked like a seasoned actor on the stage in the National Theatre. In fact, I had temporarily forgotten I was teaching, as much as I deserve. Why? That is the lady. The Merchant of Venice had become a vital part of my professional life. I grew to like it very much after we acted it at school many years back. I had been in Form 4 then, and I had acted the part of Portia because of my age and tender looks. I had been the only boy without a beard in the whole school, and since mine was a boys' school, the master concerned with the play could not find any better alternative. In 1947, when I came back from Cambridge with a clean third-class Bachelor of Education degree and started teaching, my first action was to dig a copy of The Merchant of Venice from a dingy old bookstore. I made it a point to produce the play for the school every other year. In 1962, I went to Meru, to St. Margaret's Girls' School, to help start literature there. There too, my great liking for The Merchant soon became obvious. Since the book was wholly in my head, I could recite and even act, most impressively, those parts I enjoyed. This year, the school was not acting the play, so Form 3 was, as a matter of routine, reading it in class. This morning, the girls seemed to be terribly amused by my antics as I tried to act. Morocco. This was encouraging because why else should I act? Oh, sinful thought, never so rich a gem was set in worse than gold. I could see clearly that Kainda in the back right corner of the class was not attentive, but was busy writing something, possibly a letter, to break up my captivating lesson just because a girl was inattentive was too painful to contemplate. I decided to push on. Bears the figure of an angel stamped in gold, but surely this was impudence. What was even more maddening was the possibility that she might be writing to a boy, most likely a Mbatao, at the government school. With difficulty I tried to go on with my lesson. But here an angel in a golden bed lies all within. Del. No. I stopped in the middle of the word and steadily fixed her with a menacing eye. My silence and the stillness in the room, broken only by the shuffling of her papers, jerked her to attention. She gazed back. What are you writing, Kainda? I asked her in as cool a voice as I could manage. She did not answer. May I know what you are writing, Kainda? She did not seem to have heard. My anger began to rise. What are you writing, Kainda? I roared. All the students in the school knew of my bad temper, so I rarely had cases of insubordination. Nothing, she said. I could feel cold sweat oozing all over my bald head. Do you take me for a fool? I shouted at her. In a cool voice, she answered, No, Mr. Kinyua, I takes you for a teacher. Tex, I said as I started walking deliberately towards her, aware of all the eyes on me. Some girls were already nervous, whereas the diehards were preparing themselves for imminent entertainment. Kainda was hurriedly crumpling in her hand the paper she had been writing on. I sensed what would come next and took a longer pace towards her. But before I could get to her desk, the crumpled paper was in her mouth and she was chewing at it furiously. This was extremely annoying. I must get that paper, I thought. To retrieve it from her mouth was going to be quite a tug of war, but nevertheless, I decided to try. First, I grabbed her throat, which forced an ugly twitch onto her face, but I quickly gave up that angle of attack. Those who sat quite a distance from my quick arm's reach were beginning to laugh at the drama. I grabbed her cheeks with my right hand and applied a little pressure while using my other hand to probe in her mouth. It opened a bit. I was afraid she might swallow the paper, thus destroying my strongest exhibit. So I pushed my left index finger deeper into her mouth to arrest the paper in good time. But alas, my action was ill-advised. When she brought her lower jaw up again, I felt as if a bread knife had stabbed at my finger. The bite was so unexpected that it forced a hoarse cry from my aging throat. This sent the whole class into fits of laughter. With a violent jerk, I freed my badly mauled finger and rolled my right hand into a stone-hard fist, ready to strike a savage blow at her beautiful, but now contorted face. I did not strike her for two reasons. First, I did not want to dash my long-cherished hopes and plans for this girl carelessly. Second, I could see she was in some kind of terrible pain. Obviously, she had tried to swallow the paper, but it had stuck in her throat. This could easily cause death. After 24 years of clean service, I was not going to taint my name now. So I let her walk out of class, tears streaming down her cheeks. Shut up! I yelled at the class and dealt a wicked slap to the girl sitting at the next desk. The girl had not even been shouting, but someone had to pay for my humiliation. Joyce, I said, go with Kainda and make sure she gets cold water to drink from the kitchen. Joyce went. I turned again and looked at Kainda's desk. There lay several writing pad sheets, blue delicate paper, with drawings in the bottom left-hand corner, mostly pictures of hearts with arrows through them, accompanied by trite words like, "You are my only one," or "Take my heart." The one with "You are my only one" reminded me rudely of the old days when I was still a small boy at school. My girlfriend had always started her letters to me with "My dearest Kinyua, the only one." Then I had been too young, too cowardly to ask Rose even to kiss me, but was baffled when 2 months after she had been expelled from school because of pregnancy, she could still write to me, "My dearest Kinyua, the only one, the only one." I looked through the papers and saw that before she had written the swallowed letter, she had falsely started on 2 others, both addressed to "My sweetheart Mbatao," and had discarded them It hurt me to know that she had a man, no, a boy, she could call sweetheart, and yet Model confiscated the papers out of humiliation and sheer lack of what to say to repair my wounded pride. I decided to give a brief lecture to the class on morals. At your age, girls, I began. At your age, I expect a lot of. The bell to end the period rang. In my office I sat and stared blankly at the confiscated paper. Should I call this Kainda in and scold her, supposing she walked out on me? No, she could not. I was the deputy headmaster. Model started to imagine the good Kainda coming in, humble with worried eyes. I could see her chest heaving up and down as she steadily looked at me, expecting the worst. Then, father. Pictures of Kainda would not form in my mind. Her father's picture came to my mind instead. Kinoti, Kainda's father. I told myself that Kainda would be a gift to me from St. Margaret's Girls' Secondary School for all the years of toil, yes, a gift from the school whose growth I had watched painfully through the years. From a small bush school with only 5 buildings on the compound, it had grown into quite a big school with well over 480 students, many buildings, and a high reputation in the province. The school stood on a small hill, commanding a clear view of the surrounding villages. The whole setup covered about 30 acres. It was surrounded by a 6-foot-high barbed wire fence with 12 strands, each placed 6 inches above the other to make sure, and a thorny hedge behind the barbed wire to make double sure, if the security precautions had been taken to keep out thieves, then whoever designed the school must have been very considerate. But if all this had been for the purpose of hemming the girls in from outside evil, then the designer must have had very little faith in both the people from the surrounding areas and the girls who would be kept inside St. Margaret's. The school, with its red roofs and dots of trees all over the compound, was very beautiful. From this beautiful school, I was determined to get a gift in the shape of Kainda, Mr. Josephat, Kinoti's daughter. Chapter 2. Kinoti came from Chogoria, a small town deep in the reserves of the Meru district of Kenya, about 30 to 40 miles along the Meru-Embu Road, which is a very rough, windy, dry weather road. The small road that led to his beautiful stone house was a lot better than the awful main road. When the then East African Posts and Telecommunications opened a manual telephone exchange at Chogoria Market, he was the first individual to install a telephone in his house. When the East Africa Power and Lighting Company decided to extend its influence to remote areas of the province, he was quick to install Stimo to crown his building efforts. The place stood like Pin Island above the forest of ordinary Chogoria, a strong cedar hedge further strengthened by 4 closely fixed strands of 25-gauge barbed wire protected the home from the outside. At the gate stood a clear notice: trespassers are liable to prosecution. At the age of 29, Kinoti went to West Berlin in Germany to study the art of tea making. All expenses paid. The course was supposed to last 3.5 years, but after 2 years, he had returned without a diploma or even a certificate. It transpired that he had tampered with his principal's youngest daughter and had found himself on the next flight back to Nairobi without his luggage. 3 years later, Father Ngugi blessed Kinoti's marriage to Aida Mwari, a tall, ugly girl who also came from Chogoria. The British had at that time discovered a strong Arab weakness for Mira and were determined to exploit it. The British East Africa Mira Syndicate was organized to deal with Mira in Kenya, and its first director was a short, greedy-eyed Arab from Oman. Kinoti's vague knowledge of liquoring stood him in good stead. He was appointed as Leaf Officer. 4 years after independence, he became director, and his title was changed to Chairman, Mira Board of Kenya. This appointment afforded him access to public funds. After 7 years of marriage, Kinoti and Mwari had only one daughter, Pauline Kainda. Desperately, Kinoti asked Father Ngugi privately for advice on the possibilities of divorce and a new marriage. Ngugi's threats were enough for him. He went home, burnt any documents that related to the Catholic Church, and went to the Seventh-day Adventist Church Reverend to register himself as a new convert. He poured all his frustrations onto Jesus Christ of Nazareth. I first met him about 11 years after all this had taken place. It was a wet day, and I had been dozing in my office after lunch. My office was quite a small, clean room, but it was badly choked with volumes of different classic authors. Sister Christina, the headmistress, had gone to Nairobi to solicit more money from the Ministry of Education for a bigger school van. So I was acting for her. It was the day that Form 1 students had to report to their schools. Only a few had turned up at our school. Because of the rain and impassable roads, a Land Rover pulled up to a stop in front of my office. On it was written, Kenya Mirei Development Authority, EP. My first reaction was to laugh. I had often seen Tea Development Authority, Cotton Board, Coffee Board, or Python Board vans, but the idea of a Mira Authority had never crossed my mind. I decided I ought to find out a lot more about it. When the gentleman stepped down, I noticed that he was tall and handsome and had the air of a civilized man. His three-piece suit reminded me of the good old days when I used to be rather extravagant. He was closely followed by his elderly, dark-skinned, ugly wife, whose dress told of an easy life. The driver was busy unpacking their daughter's paraphernalia, while she stood meekly behind her mother. My experience in dealing with big fish told me that this was no small visitor. I quickly stood up, adjusted the knot of my old necktie, pulled the flaps of my coat, finished shaking hands with them. I can see the driver unpacking signs of a new student, said I, causing everyone to laugh. There could be no better guess, he laughed, as he helped the driver to bring down a small dressing table, straight and cleared my throat as I stepped out of my office. Josephat Kinoti is my name, he said, putting out his hand to me, a knowing smile on his face. I am called Kinyua, Shulio Kinyua, I said, and I am glad to know you. And this is Aida Kinoti, my wife, and this is Pauline Kainda, our daughter, he concluded as I. Is this all Kainda's? I asked, amazed. Mrs. Kinoti at once apologized that they had not been able to buy everything until they saw how much space their daughter would be given. Is the cylinder still well sealed? She asked the driver. To my amused embarrassment, I saw the driver open one of the cartons and examine the top of a small gas cylinder. A smaller frigas cooker was in a separate carton. She always gets a chill in the evenings, so I bought her an electric heater instead of a tape recorder, Mr. Kinoti said, with the satisfaction of a triumphant father. I thought I must be dreaming. When I saw a medium-sized fan, I simply resigned myself. He must have read the surprise in my eyes, for despite the brief silence, he smiled at me benevolently. Background assumed a somber look. Come in. Come into the office, Mr. Kinoti. Come in, madam. Feel at home, Kainda. I ushered them into the office. Now, I really don't know how much money this girl will need. Excuse me a moment, I interrupted, going to the door to get a senior student who could help take Kainda and her belongings to a dormitory. Now, the money, you know, schools have changed a lot since our day. 5 shillings a term for pocket money used to be an indication of wealthy parents. But now, 100 shillings is nothing. Nothing at all. Especially for a girl who has to buy all sorts of... Mrs. Kinoti tried to complete the nowadays picture. We provide most of the needs: blankets, bed sheets, basins, washing soap, of course food, toilet. Whoa, a girl needs a lot more, Mr. Kinyua. A girl needs a great deal, Mr. Kinoti said. I am sure 30 shillings would do, I said earnestly. They both burst out laughing. I felt a fool and realized that I must have talked too much. Possibly I had betrayed my own poverty-riddled. You see, Mr. Kinyua, money can never be enough. Even if you had 1,000,000 shillings per week, you would still find a few items you couldn't manage to buy because of lack of money. He looked at his wife, who nodded in complete agreement. If you don't give a child like this one money, she will look for a sugar daddy. Is that better in any way? Their faces had already assumed a somber look. You don't give the child everything she wants, do you? I asked, hoping that I would be allowed to start chanting out all the psychology of child growth I had learned from Professor Nib at Cambridge. But Kinoti was not going to give me the chance. Exactly. Now you are coming to the point. If you don't give her everything she needs, she will get the rest from someone else. Is that a good thing? He smiled to show that he knew he had scored a point. Psychologically speaking, Mr. Kinoti, I began only to be interrupted again. Psychology is in books, Mr. Kinyua. Psychology is in books. Can you show me where it has worked in life? He looked at his wife for further support, nodded, and pulled out a sizable wad of new 100-shilling notes from his breast pocket. When I saw the wad, I licked my lips. That morning, I had rushed to the bank to see whether the Teachers' Service Commission had deposited my month's salary yet, only to be disappointed. I had come back and literally begged my houseboy, whose monthly salary was 45 shillings, to bear with me for another 5 days. Now here stood a man calmly, with I do not know how many thousands of shillings in his hands, simply because he had brought a daughter to school. All the same, Mr. Kinoti, I continued earnestly, you should not give a child everything she wants. If you gave every child everything she wanted, what? Party, not every child. he cut in to correct me. Not every child, Mr. Kinyua. She is the only child we. I detected bitterness in his voice and decided to drop the argument immediately. At that moment, Kainda came back to join us. Have you been shown a bed and everything else, child? The word child did not roll off my tongue smoothly, but I could see I had earned an extra mark by fooling with it. The parents were impressed. Look after her, mwalimu, her mother said, half telling, half imploring, in a tone of someone used to having her way with people. Pauline, if you ever want anything urgently, go to the teacher, then let us know how much we have to refund, Mr. Kinoti said. I am relieved. At least I know I am leaving her with a friend, said the mother. Mr. Kinoti apologized to the girl for the small amount of money he would be leaving her. When you come home for your half-term holiday, we shall see, okay? Outside the office, mother and daughter shed a few tears, more for ceremonial purposes than for grief, I thought. Before he got into his Land Rover, Mr. Kinoti turned, looked at me and said, Mwalimu, take care of her, please. When you come to Nairobi, you must stay with us. He dipped into his pocket, brought out an address card, and shoved it into my hand. A minute later, the driver was revving the Land Rover down the rough road to Meru town and on to Nairobi. Now, come in and I will help you to fill in the forms, I said to the girl, but uppermost in my mind was what an ass the headmistress would think me later when she found all the cookers, heaters, and the rest in the dormitory. Pauline, I said casually, many students here are not trustworthy. I would not trust them with your new property. The mirror might get broken, the flat iron and the heater could be stolen, the fan will almost certainly be misused. They might even try to burn the dormitory down using your gas. She looked terribly alarmed. I suggest we keep them in my house for a time until you've got to know who is a friend and who is not. What do you think? She agreed easily, and 30 minutes later the unnecessary items were in my house. As she bent low to fill in the forms that lay on the table in front of me, I could clearly see the newly sprouted breasts on her smooth-skinned chest. Her soft, fairly tight-fitting dress with its low-cut neck told me more that I could have guessed about her. She was very beautiful, but young. She said she was 17, which I could not dispute, considering that such an only child might well be held at home longer for the sake of spoiling her. She cut a very alluring figure. She was about 5'5", with very well-shaped legs springing from a behind that promised to be full before long. She had a long neck, blameless white teeth with an enticing gap, full lips, brown eyes, maybe a little too brown for a Miru, and jet black hair. Her forehead was well rounded. Only her fingernails were not impressive. They were of the type that would never grow, long enough to facilitate cutex application, but that would be made up for by the lipstick on her inviting lips. Give her another 2 years and she would cause accidents. By the time she left my office, I was feeling a bit tight. The memory of my aborted marriage started creeping back over me, but I soon brushed it aside and gave myself and this girl 2.5 years. Meanwhile, she continued to grow in all ways, week after week, month after month. She somehow never managed to take her cooker, fan, and heater to the dormitory, but the dressing mirror she took from me at the beginning of her second year at the school. The afternoon she came for it, she had applied a thin coating of lipstick and had put on an afro wig. That day we had a fundraising dance. That was the first day I saw her with my nephew, Mugambi, who was at the government school, in Form 4, and another older boy. That year I stayed twice with the Kinotis in Nairobi. One was during the school term, when I had gone to town to buy a few laboratory items. Another time was during the holidays. On both occasions I had given her parents very good verbal reports on Kainda, especially on the second occasion when I knew she was in earshot. On both occasions, Mr. Kinoti and his wife had attributed Kainda's goodness to the saving power of Jesus. He had saved her parents, thereby giving her the chance of developing into an enviable child. Of course, all this did not mean much to me, for I knew what I was after. One day at the end of April, when Kainda was in her third year, something happened that seemed to be fate's plot to hasten my long-desired goal. Very early in the morning, at about 5 o'clock, when I was engaged in late dreams, I was jerked out of my sleep by a rough knock on my door. In April, all educational establishments were on Easter holiday, but I was still in school. A bad habit I had developed over a long time was sleeping naked. Wearing pajamas always made me feel very uncomfortable. So, when persistent knocking finally jolted me out of my hard-earned sleep, I quickly pulled on my dressing gown and stumbled to the front door, a trifle panicky. A quick switch on of the security light and a peep through the peephole in the door revealed Mr. Kinoti. I hurriedly turned the key, drew back the bolt, and threw open the door. "Why?" I cried. "Mr. Kinoti, I can't believe my eyes." "You'd better. How are you, Julio?" He greeted me, coming in uninvited. It was a long time since anyone had addressed me by the name Julio. This is an awkward hour to pay visits, so I apologize. Aida asked me to remember her, to you. And of course, Pauline asked me to convey her greetings. I could see that the bit about Pauline was a lie. I was worried in case you might be at home for your holiday. You never gave me proper directions to your home, you see? Now, if there was anything I really loathed, it was talk about my home. It is funny how the world will always fight to get in contact with those areas of your life you would like to forget. I made an effort and averted the trouble. "A cup of coffee?" I asked, to make sure that if there was still a lingering temptation to discuss my home question, I murdered it prematurely. No. I am in a great hurry to get back to Nairobi. This afternoon I am going to Saudi Arabia. For 2 months, there is an advanced course on the effects of mirror on reproduction in higher animals, and I am one of the only 2 people from East and Central Africa. I didn't know mirror had budgets, so I wanted to say important, but thought better of it. Could be so far-reaching in its effect. So I thought I should come and see you on a very grievous issue before leaving the country. My mind started racing furiously up and down to see whether there was any friend I had ever told about my secret longing, who in turn could have betrayed me to this man. I could not remember any. The only thing I could remember was a time last term in my office when I had jabbed my finger in Pauline's side and both of us had taken it with good humor. She must have reported this to her father, I thought. I was just about to explain that the incident had been a mere accident in a squeezed office when he interrupted my line of thought and intended explanation. Julio, this boy called Mbatauhus at the government school, do you know anything about him and Kainda? I was relieved. No, I answered in a low conspiratorial voice. I haven't heard anything. Pauline is such a good girl that to suspect her of anything is difficult. I remembered the wig, lipstick, the two boys, one of whom was now sleeping in the next room, the dressing mirror. It all rushed back to my mind. Have you heard anything unfortunate? I asked tentatively. He gave a heavy sigh and licked his upper lip. Brother, he said, my daughter will soon let me down. I am sure if I don't handle the situation firmly, she will let me down. Julio, can you do me one service, one favor? He asked seriously. Speak, I answered. I want Pauline to be protected from this Mbatao boy. She is young, he is old and tricky. He will be out of school in 5 months' time. I want her to study. I can't see why she should run after such a poor boy. He will ruin her and be gone before I can even catch up with him. Do you know where this boy comes from? Kanyakin. His father? He works in a butchery belonging to a certain Gitonga at Kanyakine. I could see the problem was going to be rather tricky. How does one start getting involved with such fellows? He must have guessed at my thoughts, for he said, Look, I would have dealt with the problem myself before leaving the country, but the means I have are extreme and would hurt a lot of innocent people. How would you go about it? I asked, anxious to see whether any way could be found to save me from the matter. Simple, he said. I get the officer in charge of police division, Meru, to throw the boy's father into jail and make it clear to him that it is because of his son's misconduct. The son won't be able to stand seeing his father in the cooler because of a girl. Why don't you lock up the culprit instead? I asked hopefully. The headmaster would want to know why. You tell him. To run about with my daughter is no crime. The Constitution does not forbid it. Locking up the old man would be a crime, which can be attended to. It would also be a sin before. Party, Jesus has limits. Do you think there is anything you can do to protect her? Aida and I thought. The safest way might be to tackle the problem from this end. The problem seemed simple. The only thing one could do was to make sure that the two never met on form. 3. Shopping Saturdays, I could contrive to give detention to 10 girls, one of them Pauline, on the visitors. Sunday, it might be possible to punish girls with plaited hair, cutex on the nails or earrings. Pauline could never escape all of these. I promise I will. If need be, I will organize thugs to beat up the boy. Party. But not when he is with her. No, of course not. Leave everything to me. Set your mind at rest. After a cup of hot chocolate, he was gone. This was how I came to take an even keener interest in the girl's private affairs. The trouble was that the keener my interest grew, the more my obsession for the girl grew. This was exactly the reason why I was so disturbed when she rudely decided to write to Mbatao during my class, was still the Merchant of Venice class. I must admit, though, with a certain amount of pride, that to date my attempts to block her from Mbatao had been fairly successful. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this exciting adventure. Don't forget to subscribe to see what happens next.